Good afternoon. My name is Julie Cappa. I am the Social Security Disability Representative here at Ankin Law. What I do here is I help people get medically approved for Social Security disability benefits. And we're going to just talk today about the most common reasons Social Security disability applications get denied and what you can do to improve your chances of getting approved for benefits. So just to tell you a little bit about me and my background here and my qualifications to be talking to you today, I am born and raised in Chicago. I attended Loyola University Chicago for my undergrad, where I got a degree in paralegal studies, and I began my career in the legal field working at various Social Security law firms. About 5 years ago, I started working here at Ankin Law. About 4 years ago, I studied the Social Security rules and regulations specifically, and I flew to Baltimore and I took a test on just the Social Security law. I passed the test, so that allows me to represent people as a non-attorney. So total, I've been doing Social Security for this is my 15th year in the Social Security field. The last 4 years specifically, I've been doing everything from filing the applications to attending hearings for my clients, and once they're approved, making sure their benefits are paid correctly. So that is kind of my experience here. I would say the difference between me and an attorney is, yes, attorneys go to law school and they pass the bar, but we don't know what their education is specifically in Social Security disability. For me to practice as a non-attorney, the government requires me to specifically study disability law and pass their version of the bar just on Social Security benefits. So I would argue I probably know more about Social Security disability than the attorneys that you encounter. So enough about me. To begin then, 8 reasons why your Social Security claim gets denied. All this information that you receive today, it's all general information about Social Security. It does not constitute any legal advice. It does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. If you have specific questions about your situation, your benefits, I advise you to contact Social Security directly. If you just have more general questions about Social Security, you can always visit their website, ssa.gov, which has all of the laws, the rules, and regulations, everything on there. So then to begin here, this is me. So just we're going to go over the basics of Social Security, the medical requirements and the non-medical requirements to filing applications, qualifying for benefits, and getting the case approved. So to begin with, and if I'm going too fast through the slides, please let me know. To begin with then, no work, no taxes, no Social Security. So Social Security is a pay-to-play program, okay? The way you work, the way you qualify for benefits is you work, you pay your taxes, then when required, when you retire, or if you need to file for disability, you qualify for benefits at that time. So why it's important to know this is especially in the economy today, where there's so many gig workers who work maybe 2 jobs part-time, or you're self-employed, or you're working for cash, things like that. If you don't pay taxes, you don't qualify for benefits. So however you're getting paid, you want to make sure that you're filing taxes on that money, so you're paying the Social Security taxes so you qualify for the benefits. And this is what you want to do, obviously, when you're still working. You know, even if you're working for cash, you know, that still counts, and that can be applied to your work record, but only if you file taxes on it. So what I advise everybody to do, healthy working people, people getting ready to retire, whoever, everyone should go to ssa.gov, set up an online account. You will have access to your earnings records. So you will see what your benefits would be when you retire, if you file for disability, if you pass away and have survivors, what they would be entitled to. You can see how much you worked and how much you paid into the system, and really look for errors. If there's an error, now is the time you want to fix it. You don't want to wait until you're retired, you're getting ready to retire or file for disability, and then you find huge errors in your record, because it might be too late at that point to fix it. So bottom line is, if you're working, whatever you're doing, make sure that you're filing taxes on that money, okay? The website for Social Security, thank you, Robert. I see your question. I will do my best to answer the questions as I see them pop up, but at the end, when we're all done with this, I'll leave it open for any other general questions people have. The website for Social Security is ssa.gov, for government. Thank you. So you can go there, you can set up an online account for yourself that will give you your earnings information. I recommend people check it yearly just to make sure that your earnings are being reported correctly. And also, everybody should be educated to know what benefits they're going to qualify for. SSA.gov also has all of the laws, the rules, the regulations. So if there's any questions you have, I know sometimes it's hard getting through on the phone to Social Security, you can always check the website for that information. Okay, so you're working, you're healthy, everything is great in your life. You still want to be checking your work record, make sure you're filing the appropriate taxes necessary on any part-time earnings, on any self-employment earnings, cash earnings, so you can qualify for benefits when you need to, okay? So then next up, we have medical treatment, okay? Whatever your impairment is, whatever your chronic conditions are, whatever reasons why you feel you cannot work, or if you're still working but work is getting more difficult due to your medical conditions, you want to make sure you're in appropriate treatment for that. To qualify for Social Security disability, not only do you have to have, a medical impairment, a diagnosis, but you also have to show that you've taken appropriate measures to get treatment and that treatment has failed. So, this would be, for example, you can't just say, oh, I have back pain or I have arthritis and not see a doctor. They're going to want to see x-rays, an x-ray, of MRI, lab results, depending on what your diagnosis is. So, if you're still working and you're developing conditions and you think that this is going to stop you from working, start that treatment right away. Get those objective test reports, start telling your doctor whatever your issues are, if, it's pain, if it's muscle stiffness, if it's depression, if it's anxiety, especially now with the world that we're living in, all of our mental health issues are definitely exacerbated by everything. Make sure you're in psychiatric treatment. Make sure you have a therapist or a counselor, or if there's medication you should be taking. Take those measures as you're working, as you're winding down your work career, or if you've already quit working and you're thinking of filing for benefits, you want that treatment. You want those treatment records in existence so you can get them and show them to Social Security, okay? I take calls every day from people, well, why can't you work? Why haven't you worked in the last year or 2 years? Well, I'm depressed or my back hurts. Okay, well, what treatment have you received? None. That's not going to help you. That's not going to get your case approved. Even the most lovable, believable people in the world, the government still has their rules they have to follow. And those rules include x-ray reports, MRI reports, physical therapy records, surgical records if needed, if appropriate. So definitely make sure that your treatment is number one and you're doing everything reasonable, everything that you can to improve your condition, okay? So then moving on then. So now, you're done working, you're at the point where your medical issues are too severe, you want to file an application. Okay, so a couple different ways you can do it. The website that I mentioned, ssa.gov, you can file an application online at their website. There's no fee for filing. It is something that anyone is allowed to do. I would recommend a computer, though, if, people try to do these things on an iPhone or an iPad and it just doesn't work. So if you have a legit computer, laptop, desktop, then you could file the application online. Social Security does accept, in the old days, they would accept appointments where they would meet you face-to-face so you could file the application in person for people who don't have computers. Now they're closed right now to the public because of COVID. They are still answering the phones, but that whole in office face-to-face appointment they're not really doing right now. So I would suggest, if you're interested in filing, I think online is the quickest way to do it. The application is very in-depth, though. So if you decide to file on your own, I get all of your information together beforehand. All of your medications that you're taking, any doctors, hospitals, anywhere that you've been to the doctor, get all names, addresses, phone numbers of those doctor's appointments, because the application requires all of that, okay? And that's another reason why people get denied, is because Social Security doesn't have all of the medical information. They don't have all the medical records. So you want to make sure that if you're filing an application, you're being thorough. Include those physical therapy records. People forget that all the time because they think, well, it's not a doctor, so it's not important. Physical therapy, I would say, is the exception to that rule. You definitely, especially for back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, you want to make sure that the government sees all of those therapy records. Same thing with ER visits. People forget about those a lot. And then just your doctor's, notes. Every time you go see your primary care doctor or your pain doctor, your neurologist, they make a note of what happened at that visit. So you want to make sure Social Security has all of those doctors' names, the addresses, so you can make sure that they're getting all of those medical records. Many cases, probably one of the biggest reasons I see cases get denied is that the government doesn't have all of the information. They don't have all of the medical information. So definitely be as thorough as you can be in that area. I wouldn't worry so much about dental records. That's not really usually relevant to cases. And then any routine testing that you do every, like a mammogram that you would do every year, things like that typically aren't as relevant unless there's any findings, anything abnormal. Obviously, you would want to include that on your application, but you don't need to do the more routine things, the preventive medicine stuff that we all do, vaccines and so forth. So when you're filling out the application, make sure you have all of your medical information in front of you so you're not running around looking for your medication bottles and so forth. Have it all with you so you can just sit there and enter it all, on the website. Okay. Another aspect of Social Security disability, and a reason why cases get denied frequently, is because of education reasons, okay? The question on the application is also, what is the highest grade you completed in school? And very frequently I see people exaggerate this, and they'll say they graduated high school even though they didn't, or they'll deny that they were in special ed when I'll be working on a case for 6 months and they'll say, well, I never told you this, but actually I was in special ed all through school and I have a really hard time reading and writing. This is not the time to exaggerate, what a fantastic person you are. You want to be honest with Social Security. When you're over 50, they do look at your highest level of education to see if you're vocationally, what other vocational skills you may have, and that does matter. That does matter if you have a GED or if you graduated high school or whatever, if you dropped out in 9th grade. You want them to know that. You want to be honest with them. And I would say this affects probably people over 50 the most, and younger people, let's say between 18 and 25, those younger people where special ed is more common, I would say, today than it probably was 20, 30 years ago. So a lot of times those records are still in existence and still available. And if we know about it, we can get those medical records and we can add that to the case as well. So education is important. They're not just asking you these questions because they're bored and they want to know everything about you. They're asking these questions because it's part of the law as to what education level you have, because that can determine what types of jobs are available to you in the national economy. It's not just Chicago, it's not just Illinois, it's not just the region, it's the whole national economy. What jobs exist that you can do on a regular basis. Okay. Okay. So this is more for what you can do to be proactive and help your case. Okay. Besides having a diagnosis, what you want to explain to Social Security is what your limitations are and what your restrictions are. The difference between those two terms is a limitation would be your own personal assessment as to what you can do or what you can't do. For example, I can walk a block, but I have to take a break. I need to take a 5-minute break because I get out of breath, or my leg hurts, or my back hurts. So a limitation is your own idea of what you can and cannot do. A restriction is your doctor's opinion. Is a doctor writing, Joe Smith cannot sit for more than 1 hour. He needs to take a break, be able to stand and walk around. Or, Mary Jones cannot use her right hand throughout the day. Something like that. That is something a doctor is writing. That is a restriction as to what you are able to do or not do. If you notice, we're specific in these terms, in these ideas. You don't want to say stuff like, well, sometimes my back hurts, or sometimes it's hard for me to get out of bed in the morning. You want to be as specific as you can be. I can walk a block, I can walk a mile, I can sit for an hour or 2 hours, or whatever it is, because Social Security is going to take those limitations and restrictions and apply them to the job market and see what employers allow, what they don't allow in terms of work accommodation. Having doctors write, so-and-so cannot work, they cannot do any jobs, the off-work notes that are common with workers' comp cases, those types of documents generally tend to be more superfluous. They're not specific enough, they're too vague. The government has very, very black and white definitions as to what sit-down work is, what light duty work is, to the phrase of, 2 hours or more sitting every day is considered sedentary work, for example. 6 hours is sedentary. If you're standing for 6 hours, that's more light duty work. They have very, very specific definitions for these jobs. So you want to make sure that you're being specific in telling the government what you can and cannot do. And ask your doctor for a specific letter, possibly, as to what he or she thinks your restrictions are. Just having a doctor write, Mary Jones cannot work, that's not going to get you anywhere. You want to be as specific as you can be in these reports and in writing, explaining what your own issues that you're having are. So you're on your own, you're filing your application is complete, you've submitted it to Social Security, right? So now you think, now what can I do? Robert, I see your question. I will get to it at the end of the presentation, okay? So your application is filed. You know that it's pending with Social Security. Now what? Well, the government then is required to request your medical records and review your records to determine diagnosis, limitations, and restrictions, okay? Another reason people get denied all the time is that they assume the government is doing their due diligence. Well, I told Social Security where my doctors were, so I'm sure they're going to get all the medical records, right? No. Take it upon yourself to follow up with that with your doctor's offices, with hospitals, to make sure that they've sent the records to Social Security. Sometimes if we're having a really hard time, I've had clients go to the hospital themselves and pick up the records and, you know, drop them off at my office, because some of these mom and pop offices, you know, they just don't have the resources that the larger hospitals do to send the records, you know, efficiently. So you want to make sure that you are staying on top of it. That's why a lot of people like to hire a representative in the beginning, because that's part of what I do, is that I call these doctors, these hospitals, make sure that they get the records, make sure that everything gets submitted, follow up with the adjudicators, with the judge's assistants, to make sure that the records are in the right place at the right time so they get added to the file. You know, it goes to my earlier statement where a lot of the reason why cases get denied is because the government doesn't have all of the information. So that's a very easy thing we can all do to make sure that, you know, if they're denying you, that, you know, we want to make sure that they're not denying you because they're missing stuff. So you want to make sure that they have, if they're requesting paperwork from you, you want to make sure that they have it. You want to submit it, you know, call them, follow up, confirm that they received it. Because, you know, a lot of times stuff, you think you submit it, and you know, you might do in good faith submit it, but you might be submitting it to the wrong office and it never gets to the right person. And unfortunately, Social Security is not as centralized as we would like them to be and as people think they are. Whereas if you send something to the wrong office, you hope that person who gets it does the right thing and adds it to the file. It doesn't always happen though. Sometimes it just gets lost in oblivion. So you want to make sure that your stuff is getting submitted to the right office at the right time, so it gets in the actual hands of the person making the decision on your case. You want to follow up with those people to make sure that they've received the documents and they've actually read them. I mean, I've definitely had cases get denied because I think that they didn't read the medical records that were submitted. So you want to, you know, really follow up with them and make sure that they're paying attention to your case and that they're looking at everything that they need to look at. That's why a lot of people like to hire somebody straight off, like right off the bat, because that's, you know, somebody can do that for you if you're just not up to it or you don't want to deal with Social Security or waiting on hold, all those fun things that come with it. So Robert did ask a question. I will address it now. A termination letter. What about a termination letter from work? Yeah, all of that, Robert, you can absolutely submit that to Social Security. I do find those letters can be helpful, especially if, like, for example, you've been on FMLA and you've exhausted your FMLA, so you get a letter from your employer, you know, return to work or we're going to have to let you go because we have to fill the position. Letters like that, I think, can be helpful. And a letter, you know, for example, due to a work injury, you know, well, you know, Mr. Smith, you have a 10-pound lifting restriction. We don't have any jobs here that can accommodate that restriction. Therefore, we're terminating your employment. You know, letters like that, absolutely. I always ask my clients for those, and I definitely would recommend submitting any of those. It also goes to your credibility that, you know, you were ready and willing to work, but they can't accommodate the restriction, you know. So I think stuff like that definitely can go a long way in support of your case. Okay. Okay. So something else Social Security is going to ask you for is your work history. Part of the law requires the government to look at the last 15 years that you worked and determine if you can go back to any of those jobs, okay? So part of the application that you file, they're going to ask you, where did you work? And tell me what you were doing at these jobs, like sitting, standing, walking, lifting, carrying, that type of thing. And also non-exertional things like, were you writing? Were you filling out reports? Were you supervising people? Things like that. So I'm going to break this down into two separate areas, people who are over 50 and people who are under 50, okay? Because the law is different regarding the two age groups. If you're under 50, yes, the government will look at your work history to determine what work you did and if you could return to any of that work. But even if you cannot return to any of that work, the government will still look at other jobs to see if you could do anything lighter. For example, we will take a 40-year-old construction worker who is lifting 50 to 100 pounds a day, working heavy equipment, maybe as a forklift driver at times, climbing ladders, ropes, scaffolds, very heavy physical work. Okay, and this person has a back injury. They need maybe a minor back surgery. They're not able to lift 50 pounds anymore. So the government will say to him, okay, well, we know you can't do that job anymore, but because you're 40 years old, we think you could be a cashier, or we think you could be a telemarketer, because those jobs don't require that you lift 50 pounds. So that's why it also goes back to the limitations and restrictions, which we talked about earlier, is you want to make sure that the government has a clear understanding of what your limitations and restrictions are. Because when you're under 50, it's not just enough to say, I can't do my job anymore. They're going to look at every other job in the national economy to see if there's any lighter work that you can do. And if the government finds that there's work in significant numbers, then you are not disabled under the law. Significant numbers I like to do air quotes for, because what does that mean? Is it 10,000 jobs? Is it 50,000 jobs? Is it 100,000 jobs? Everybody has their own interpretation of what that is. There's no definitive number. It just has to be something significant. So you want to keep that in mind, especially when you're under 50. You want to make sure that you're getting any physical limitation and mental health limitations. You want to make sure you have all that documented. Medication side effects, social anxiety issues, just depressive issues that, sometimes it's hard for me to get out of bed. You want to make sure all of that stuff is documented. When you're over 50, the rules are a little bit different, and those vocational factors come into play a lot more, like the education issue. The government will eliminate jobs based off of education requirements because, well, this job will require a college degree or a high school diploma or certain training that if you're over 50, the government will say, well, okay, we know you're not going to go back to school now and get retrained in this area. So they will begin eliminating jobs. It's not as stringent as under 50 where you have to show you cannot do any job at all. But that's why the work history becomes more important. You really want to give a clear description. The difference between lifting 10 pounds every day and lifting 50 pounds every day is important because there's different rules for what is required at jobs. So you want to make sure that you're being as clear and as concise as possible in your description of your past work. You want to avoid words like sometimes, a little bit, well, every day is different. Every day is different for everybody always. You want to give your best assessment of what you were generally doing at work every day. But then think about, what is the hardest day I've ever had? What did I have to do that day, and why was that so hard? You want to make sure you include that too, because if that's part of your job duties and your job description, you want to make sure that you're including that. Well, I load and unload trucks. That's my job. And I'm lifting 20 to 50 pounds every day, all day for 8 hours. But once a week, we get a shipment from Florida where I'm lifting 100 pounds, and I'm doing that by myself because there's nobody else there to help me. You want to make sure that you're including all of that stuff, not just the stuff that you're doing daily, because that other stuff too, if it's mandatory and if it's required, you want to make sure the government knows exactly how physically exertional your job is, okay? You don't have to include lunch breaks. You don't have to include any other type of scheduled break you get, just what you're actually required to do. Another issue is, and this goes for everybody, people under 50 and over 50. The government will always ask you, were you a supervisor? Everybody likes to say yes. Everybody always tells me, well, I was the receptionist, but I was actually running the whole company. The legal definition of what a supervisor is somebody who hires and fires people, somebody who is making managerial decisions like that, making schedules, doing payroll, training staff, things of a managerial nature, okay? And if you were legitimately doing that, then yes, you were the supervisor, you were the manager, yes. But if you were just the lead worker, you want to make sure that the government knows that. Don't say you were a supervisor if you did not officially have that title and those responsibilities, okay? Lots of hardworking people step up. They do more than what their job requires them to do just because they're good, hardworking people. But if that's not really your job, if you are not really hiring and firing people, you don't want to say that you're a supervisor, because if you do, the government will say, well, okay, you might have been the supervisor as a mechanic, and that was very heavy work, but then you could be a supervisor in an office because you know how to interview people, you know how to do payroll, you know how to hire and fire people. So you want to make sure that you are giving a good description of your job and your supervisory status. Robert has a question here. What about if you were a foreman? Robert, I would say the same thing applies. Some foremen are legitimate managers and are running everything and hire and fire people and write people up for, insubordinate behavior, attendance issues. If that is generally what you were doing, then yes, say you were a manager because that's what you were actually doing. But if you don't have any of that authority, if you don't have any of those responsibilities, you can always say that you were a working supervisor or a lead worker, because the government will acknowledge that there are working supervisors. Well, I supervised everybody, all the other mechanics. I was the lead mechanic and I was supervising all the other mechanics, but I was doing the work right alongside of them. That's a working supervisor. A lead worker is different than an actual manager / supervisor in like Social Security's eyes. That they're thinking of, you're sitting in an office on a computer, doing payroll and interviewing new employees, not doing the physical work. So you want to make sure that if that is your situation, that you're explaining that clearly. Robert, is that good? Does that answer your question? You can just type back in the chat and let me know. Alina, I see your question here. I will get to that at the end of the session, okay, because that's kind of a different issue. It's a good question and it's important, but we will address that separately at the end. Okay. Okay. Just reading the comments here, I want to make sure I'm staying, on task and answering all the questions that are coming in. So, all right. So that is work history, okay? And that's why it's important, because a lot of cases get denied because people ignore it, or they write, oh, I sit all day. Well, if you're a forklift driver, you might be sitting all day, but it's actually still a very heavy exertional job. So you want to make sure that you're giving the government a good description so they don't deny you because they think you could still do your past work. Okay, moving forward. Oh, okay. Okay. So a common question people ask me is, well, when should I hire somebody to file for benefits? I want to hire somebody. I hear a lot of different things from a lot of different people. I don't know what to do. So you could file an application on your own. Like I said, I would suggest you have a working computer. You can file it on your own. You can file it. You can always request a paper application from Social Security. I would not recommend doing that. I feel like it would either get lost in the mail or would get lost on somebody's desk, but you could also do that. If you have a computer and you can file it online and you want to, you can absolutely do that if you want. Like I said, there's no fee for filing. You just have to be willing to do the work involved, to do the follow-up work. It's not just filing the application and then you're done with it. There is usually, a great deal of follow-up you want to do. A lot of times people do want to try on their own and they will call me with a denial letter and say to me, I filed on my own, I got denied, can I hire you now? Absolutely. You can, it's up to you and what your personal preference is. If you want to try on your own first and then hire somebody, that's absolutely okay. And most, me definitely, most other lawyers I know, will take a case at any step of the process. So if you want to hire someone with a denial letter, definitely make sure you call with the denial letter in hand so I could get that information off of it so we know why you were denied and what is required with the appeal. All appeals do have a 60-day statute of limitations. So you want to make sure that you get the appeal filed within that time frame, or else the government does not have to accept it. So rather than having to start all over again, you definitely want to make sure that you get that appeal in on time. If you do have to go to a hearing, okay, and that happens if people get denied twice, then that next appeal is a request for hearing appeal. At that level, I would recommend to everybody, hire somebody, hire a lawyer, an advocate, a representative, hire somebody who knows what they're doing, because you're going to have to go in front of a judge who's very well versed in the law. So you want to make sure that you have somebody who's just as well versed in the law as the judge, somebody who knows the ins and outs of the law, who can look at your file, see what's missing, get the missing documents, and along with that, make a good legal argument as to why you are entitled to the benefits. That is something that we do in all of our cases here. You want to make sure you have a good legal argument. For me, not just one. I make sure I have Plan A, Plan B, and a Plan C. And, I will present all of them, if necessary, to the judge. Judge, I think you can improve it this way. And if you don't like that one, there's this one. And if you don't believe that, here's this one. You want to have, options. You want to have more than one option. And, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? That's what they say. So you want to have somebody who really knows what they're doing. And definitely don't wait to the last minute. If you know you're going to have a hearing, call ASAP. You don't want to wait until you get a hearing notice in the mail. Oh, my hearing's on Monday. Can you help me? I get those calls at least once a week from people. For me, those cases really worry me because, again, I like to look at the file before the hearing, read all of the medical records, determine what's missing medical record-wise, if there's other evidence that's missing, like Robert had mentioned, termination letters from employers. We want to make sure all of those documents get in the file before the hearing. So if you do have to go to a hearing, as soon as you know, as soon as you're filing that hearing appeal, I would call me. Call me immediately. Let's talk then. You don't want anybody working on your case at the last minute, scrambling to get documents and so forth. It's stress on you. It's stress on me. And it's not good for you. You want to have everything prepared well in advance so you can increase your likelihood of getting approved. Okay, so that is my advice. And again, that's only if you have to go to a hearing, and that's only if your application gets denied and then your reconsideration appeal gets denied. Then you would have to request that hearing in front of a judge. So I've had people do that application on their own, do that reconsideration appeal on their own, because those typically don't require a face-to-face with a judge. But again, if you're going in front of a judge and this judge has your life really in their hands, your livelihood, you want to make sure that you're with somebody who knows what they're doing and who can advocate for you correctly. It's not just enough to have a diagnosis. It's not just enough sometimes to have the medical records. Sometimes you need those other supporting documents that can kind of push the case over the edge and make it impossible for the judge to deny. So that would be my advice to you there. So, you really want to be, if you're filing on your own, which you can do, definitely be thorough, be accurate. If you don't want to file, if it's too overwhelming for you, or I've had people who say, well, I called Social Security and I was on hold for 10 minutes and I lost my mind. I hung up and I called you because I don't want to have to deal with that. Understood, believe me. Nobody understands what it's like waiting on hold with Social Security like I do. I understand, and I understand people already sick, dealing with their medical issues. They don't want to deal with the government. So my office here, I know we're unique in that way. A lot of offices don't offer that, but we do offer filing applications on behalf of people. You don't have to call us with a denial. We can help you from the beginning. So so that is my advice and my little spiel about that. Now, okay, so it's about 43 minutes now. So if anyone has questions, feel free to type them in here, and I will answer them to the best of my ability here. I see, okay, Olena had a question from earlier. What if I worked less than 15 years? Can I still apply? Great question. Okay, so for Social Security disability, okay, the government requires you generally to have worked 5 of the last 10 years, okay? When I say work, that means you worked, you paid taxes, you had a real job where you got a paycheck. It's not like you were working for cash or babysitting for your neighbor. You had a job where you worked and you filed taxes. Then you could still apply for benefits and you would still qualify for Social Security disability. You don't have to necessarily have worked every year the last 15 years. They do allow gaps in employment, but your work credits do have to be recent. An unfortunate problem with Social Security is just for disability, not for retirement. For retirement, the government looks at your whole work record and all of that applies. I'm just talking about disability, okay? Your work credits do expire. And the work you did when you were 16, those work credits you got, they don't apply to when you're 50. The government just looks at the last 10 years, and you have to have worked enough and paid enough taxes in the last 10 years, okay? If you don't, let's say, you were a stay-at-home mom, or, there were some other issues. I've had people who are incarcerated, honestly, who, were not working due to various other reasons, but they still have a medical issue and they still want to file for benefits. That's where SSI comes into play. SSI is another benefit for people who don't have enough work credits, but still are disabled and still cannot work. But there are a lot of other financial rules in place for SSI. SSI looks at your whole household income. So if you are married and your spouse works, they count that income as your own. If you're getting a pension from somewhere else, if you have a 401k, if you have other types of annuities, policies, the government counts all of that, and they want you to exhaust all of that before you could file for SSI. So SSI is a great benefit for people who don't qualify for disability because of the work credit issue, but remember there are also that income issue that you have to meet too. And if you have too much money, the government will not pay you SSI for that reason, even though you have a medical issue. Okay, then we have here, can I work part-time and still get approved? The work rules are very, very gray, okay? Part-time work gets a lot of people in trouble because they think, well, I'm working part-time, so that's okay, right? It's not so much part-time work that's important. It's about how much you're earning, okay? And yes, even part-time, you could earn too much money to qualify for benefits. If you're on disability, all of your earnings must be reported to Social Security. Alina, I don't really want to get into the specifics too much because it's kind of complicated and we don't have that much time left. So I would refer you to ssa.gov if you have any specific questions. If you want to call me directly, we can speak about it over the phone. If you were thinking of filing and you think that this might be an issue that would preclude you from filing, my number here is 312-6000000. That's 312-600-0000. And we can, I can do a complete consultation with you and explain, and determine if you're working too much or too little. The bottom line, though, is that even part-time work could be substantial to Social Security. Now, that being said, Alina brings up another issue that I wanted to just bring up really quickly. People think the opposite too, and they think, well, if I go back to work for a day or a week, is the government going to throw out my application? Absolutely not. The government will allow you to try to work, to attempt to return to work if you've been out of work for a long time, to figure out what what you can and can't do. Imagine somebody who's been out of work for 2 years with cancer. They had surgery and chemo, radiation, the whole gamut. Okay, now I want to go back to work. I haven't worked in 2 years. I don't know what I can do anymore. The government will let you attempt to work to see what you can do, what you can't do, without dismissing your application or withdrawing your application. So, if you work for a day, a week, a month, that's not necessarily a case killer. If you're working more significantly, that's another conversation. But just that little attempt to work, especially if it fails due to medical reasons, the government will not necessarily count that against you. Well, here's a question here. You have to be poor or completely crippled to get Social Security benefits. I'm sorry that you feel that way. The government is strict. They are tough. The rules are, very, very strict in a lot of different ways. And you can Google all of the numbers, Social Security approval ratings, denial ratings, all of that is public record. So if you want to know, oh, I'm in Illinois, what's the approval rating? Or I'm going in front of this specific judge, what's their approval rating or denial rating? All of that stuff is public record, and you can look it up on Social Security's website. So you can know exactly what you're getting into. I would say, again, Robert, I've had lots of people who are not poor or completely crippled who have good diagnoses, good treatment records, and I'm able to file those applications and make a good legal argument that get approved. But Right. I mean, I would be lying if I told you it wasn't a strict standard of approval. But that's why I'm here. That's why I have a job, because they don't make it easy, and they do deny good cases, and I do appeal those cases, to the next level until they get approved. I mean, if it were easy, I would not be here. If it were easy, I would not have been doing this for the last 15 years, because if it were easy, the government would just approve the people right away and they wouldn't have to fight for it. But the government doesn't make it easy. So that is why I am here. That's why I work every day. That's why I have hundreds of cases. I've gotten thousands of people approved over the years, because there are ways to get the cases approved. You just need to know what you're working with. You need to know what the government wants to see, what they don't want to see, what's important versus what is not important, okay? Let me see here. Any more questions? Let's see. Okay, well, I don't see any more questions. I do see my phone number is here. If you have a case that you want help with, absolutely feel free to call me. I'm more than happy to talk to you. You can ask for me directly. If you would like my email address, I'll put this here too. You can also send me an email. If there's a better time for me to reach you, you can let me know and I can reach out to you there. That's jcappa@ankinlaw.com. Or if you just have general questions, if you needed more information, I'll do my best to help you. Any really specific questions, though, about your case, if you're receiving benefits and you have very specific questions, stuff like that would have to probably be referred to Social Security directly. Sometimes it's best to just talk to them to get, whatever answer that you're looking for. But I'm more than happy to speak with you about any issues or questions that you have. And I don't see, I'll wait a minute here if anyone has any other questions about anything that you need repeated or anything that I could answer for you. Okay, I don't see anything else. So thank all of you. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for your time today. I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned something, and good luck and take care, everybody. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.